No one seems to be talking about theater, which boggles my mind, especially when I started looking into the numbers. It seems like this sector employs over 290,000 people. Currently, over 70% of those jobs are at risk. Over 34 million people visit our theaters each year. 24% of all holiday visitors to London go to the theater. Theater generates 133 million pounds in VAT payments. And again, 2.7 billion to the UK economy, which trumps the 1.1 billion spent by live sports events. I mean, it's a massive industry. And more importantly, it's the culture. It's the reason people love a city like London. And so I'd love to talk about that today. I know the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, just came out with some announcements about what they were going to do with the furlough and the work scheme. But curiously, theater, again, wasn't mentioned by name. So tell me, what's it like to be in your shoes? What's it like on the ground? And what are some of the biggest challenges you face in getting this sector back to work?
Well, as you just said, the theatre sector in the UK is unrivaled in the world. And it's one of the most successful parts of our kind of export industry as well. And that 34 million people who attend theatre that you mentioned, that's more people than go to live league football matches in the UK. And you know how popular football is in the UK. So contrary to what some people might think, theatre is a mass population interest. Lots of people go to the theatre. So yeah, this last 5-6 months since theatres had to close their doors completely in March has been awful. It's been horrible. Yes, the theatre sector has some subsidy from the state, and those theatres that are subsidised have probably been in a better position to kind of survive things. But that's only about 12-13% of all theatres in the UK. Most theatres run on practically no subsidy, and so all of their income, whether it's from ticket sales, whether it's from bar sales, whether it's from restaurant sales, all completely gone. And of course, the furlough scheme has been a lifesaver. About 70% of all the theatres have used it over the last 5 or 6 months. And even though some industries have started to go back and start to return to work, still about 50% of theatre workers are on the furlough scheme. That compares with about 12 or 13% in the general, across all industries. So the idea that the furlough scheme would come to an end at the end of October was essentially a cliff edge for the sector. We've already seen 6 theatres go into administration. About 5,000 redundancies have been announced. They've not all gone through yet, but they're in the process of discussing them. So it was great to hear the Chancellor this morning at least talk about something to replace the furlough scheme, although as you rightly point out, it's not sector specific, it's not specific to culture. In my experience, the Treasury are not keen on doing sector-specific interventions. They tend to prefer industry-wide interventions, which I kind of get, but actually doesn't make sense. So the new scheme, the job, I can't remember the new name now. I think it's called the Job Protection Scheme rather than I'm not sure.
Okay.
The Job Support Scheme, that's what it's called. Okay. So the new Job Support Scheme, it was a Job Protection Scheme before, means that you as an employer need to bring your staff back for at least 1/3 of the working week, and the government will support them or pay their salary for the other 2/3. So that works if you're running a shop or a restaurant where you've got less demand and so you don't need to bring in all your staff all the time. But that doesn't really work for theatres in the same way because it still costs the same to put on one show in one evening, regardless of whether or not you can have 100% audience in there or whether you can have 30% audience. And I think that's the critical thing. So in the middle of August, theatres were able to reopen. So March through to mid-August, completely shut. And then in the middle of August, the government announced that theatres could open but with social distancing. In the same way that restaurants can and bars can. The problem for theatres is that's just not viable. Because very few of them are subsidised, they rely on that earned income. And although it's a successful industry, it works on really narrow margins. So you need a certain number of people to come through the doors to make it even worthwhile opening those doors. And it's roughly 70%.
70% capacity.
70% capacity.
To make it even financial sense to kind of break even and paying everybody and be able to do it.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's probably not compatible with current social distancing.
No, it's not. Right now, with the current social distancing rules, at best you could probably manage 30%. So what we've seen since the middle of August is Very few theatres have reopened, although technically they can if they want to. A handful have, including some in the West End. So NIMAX, who run about 4 or 5 theatres in the West End, are planning to reopen in October. The Palladium has reopened. But what those guys are doing, some other theatres nationally as well, what all those guys are doing are putting on one-man shows.
Okay.
They're putting on cheaper shows, not the shows, not big musicals, not big theatre plays, not Shakespeare, because that's just too expensive. So they're doing it as a kind of a loss leader, as a way of encouraging the public to come back to the theatre, and as a way of at least covering some of their costs. Because even when a theatre is closed, you've got to cover whatever percentage of the staff salary that isn't going to be covered by government. You've got to pay that, and even a closed building costs money to maintain, to insure, to rent if you don't own it. All those things, all those costs haven't gone away. And we know from research that about 70% of the theatres in the UK have enough money left to last till Christmas. So this announcement today will push that date back a bit. Will make them be able, they'll enable them to last a bit longer.
Couple of months
longer, but we won't see theatres suddenly going, oh great, now we can reopen. We won't be able to reopen until one of two things happens. Either we can persuade the government, and we're working on that at the moment, either we can persuade the government that we can put in place enough what they call mitigation measures to mean that you can push the capacity up a little bit. I can tell you a little bit more about that if you want me to go into some of the detail on that. Or we get to the stage, and of course looks like we're a long way off that, we get to the stage where we can lift social distancing. That's not going to happen this side of Christmas, that's for sure. Yeah. So it's not looking great for the theatre sector.